Hi guys, welcome back to the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show, the Dragons Balls, part of the 3-Bod Rugby group. And we have a very special interview for you today. Myself and Ben, we were joined by the legend that is Gareth Evans, former Wales and 1977 Lions star. Travelled with the Lions to New Zealand on that tour, scoring 9 tries in 19 games. Quite an impressive record. Ben, what kind of things did we chat about with Gareth?
Oh mate, it was so good. Like I said to you afterwards, it was so humbling to speak to someone who's had the rich experiences that he had. He spoke so openly about his time at Newport and what it took him to get there. We spoke about how he stepped up then to the international stage when he was involved in Welsh camps, and then obviously being a Lions year, we wanted to get to know as much as we could about his time that he spent with the Lions. And also where he thinks this year's Lions side are going to be at roughly, and where the Welsh side are at roughly. But he was a fantastic guest. He really knew his stuff, and there's some very, very interesting and open parts in this interview.
Yeah, definitely. He spoke so openly and honestly, as you said, about his experiences. And one interesting thing for me was the battle between club and region and what that meant to him. And you'll find that out in the interview about his thoughts on that. So I really hope you do enjoy this interview. Thank you so much to Gareth for giving his time to us. There's some links down below if you want to see a little bit more about what he's up to these days. As always, of course, make sure to follow us here on Facebook, subscribe on YouTube, and follow us on Twitter. Myself and Ben, we also have our individual YouTube channels, so make sure to check them out as well. They'll be linked down below, so do head over there and subscribe. I hope you enjoyed the interview, and we'll see you soon here on the Welsh Rugby Roundup Show. So thank you, Gareth, for joining us tonight. First of all, how are you? How's lockdown been for you? It's been a long time we've been in lockdown, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a struggle, like everybody else. And to be honest, my wife and I haven't really gone very far. We've taken the advice of our kids and sort of, stayed at home, and we've hardly seen our grandchildren. I think we're the only people who probably abided by all the rules properly, but hopefully now things are coming together. I've had 2 jabs. My wife's had one, and a second one's due in a couple of weeks. So that signs are good, I think.
I think things are beginning to change as well, and I think we're now seeing some hopes going forward and things opening up, and obviously rugby as well, hopes for fans to be back in stadiums over the coming months. Let's take you back to the start of your career, all the way back. Tell me a little bit about how you first got into rugby. Were your family into rugby? Did you go down to the local club? How did you get into the sport?
Yeah, well, I'm born and bred in Newport, and from a very young age, my dad and relatives and brother would take me to Newport Rugby Club, and Rodney Parade was a very magical place for me, and I was watching my heroes every week, really, and that's how I got into it. So I remember, I think the first game I can really remember is Newport and the Springboks, 60-61 Springboks, and Newport lost 3-0. They were without their goal kicker, and had they kicked several kickable penalties, they would have beaten South Africa that day. But I then went on to watch, of course, the All Blacks game in 63. So my dad took me, and I was in the enclosure. And then the 66-7 Australians, which Newport drew that game, and then the 69 Springboks, which Newport won again. So I watched them play 4 games against the Southern Hemisphere side, and they only lost once. So that was great. I'm a Newport fanatic. I got into rugby through watching Newport and through playing in school. I played in Newport High School, which is a very famous school for producing, players. Colleague of mine at Newport, David Bircher, British Lion Test player. Newport's hooker David Ford, Laurie Gray, Rob Guilfoyle. Guilfoyle played a bit for Cardiff as well. Ben, you wouldn't remember him. Bob Guilfoyle, Jeff Phillips. There's lots of sort of Newport players came out of Newport High School. So I played a lot in school, but in my final year in school, we had trouble raising a side. It sounds weird, doesn't it? Sounds very strange. And I didn't play much rugby in my final year at school. So I then had to think of what I was going to do about if I wanted to play rugby, what would I do? So that kind of thought process started, really.
And obviously, rugby wasn't professional back then, but you started your career down with Newport's HSBO before moving to Cross Keys, and then you joined your beloved Newport RFC. Can you tell us a little bit about how that move came about? When was the first time you were made aware that you could potentially be joining Newport?
Well, everyone seems to say I played for Newport High School of Boys, but I only played for them once in a sevens competition when my career had actually started. But I went to Newport High School, so people are assuming that I played for the old boys, and I know a lot of them, obviously, but I never paid for them. No, what happened was when I left school, I thought, what was I going to do? And I saw an advert in the Argus, South Wales Argus, for Cross Keys trial. Well, I'll apply. Let's see where I am. I thought I was reasonably successful in school rugby, no international honours, but played pretty well. So I wanted to see how I would fare in like the first class arena. So I applied for a trial at Cross Keys, and they gave me a trial. And in those days, I played outside half, played 10, and in the first trial, funnily enough, I scored a try from about 50 or 60 yards at 10. They seemed to quite like that. And this was strange because I hadn't done any training or anything like that. I didn't know what training was about. I just turned up and did it. Then I played in the final trial and less successfully, but I still scored a try from distance. And so they wanted to keep me. And I played over 100 games for Cross Keys. And it's a fantastic little club, and I have a lot of affinity for Cross Keys. They were absolutely fantastic to me. So during my time there, I played wing, outside half to start with. I was very small in those days. I wasn't that big when I filled out a bit, but I was small, and they were worried about me getting bumped about, and they thought I might have more room in the centre. This is the thinking of the Cross Keys committee at the time. And we played against Aberavon. I said, oh, Gareth, go in the centre. You have a bit more room there. And Aberavon at the time had this guy called Mike Nicholas playing, who became a very famous then rugby league player. And he was a wing forward. And in the centre with him for Aberavon was a guy by the name of Alan Fall. There was another wing forward. They put two wing forwards in the centre. And there was me, about 8 stone, wringing wet, and I had no idea really how to tackle these people, and we lost by 50 points. But they persevered with me, and then ended up sort of on the wing in the centre. On the wing, I sort of scored quite a few tries for Cross Keys on the wing, but it was the centre I really wanted to play. So they put me in the centre, and that went pretty well. I had some very good partners there. There was a guy from the Gwent Valleys called John Derrick, who they used to turn me in my mind. They used to do a lot of my tackling for me. But like all things in the centre, you get good partnerships, and that was when I had with John. But Cross Keys were fantastic to me. They really looked after me. Great little club. When I first started, it was with Charlie Faulkner, Bobby Windsor, and Jeff Squire. So 4 of us were in the same side. So 4 future British Lions were in the Cross Keys side. In addition to a number of other top players as well. It was a great grounding for me. But of course, I've always wanted to play for Newport. It was a dream for me to play for Newport. So it was strange how that came about, though. I don't know whether you guys remember, but I don't think you will. Many years ago, Llanelli were one of the top sides in Wales. Still are, obviously, I'm joking. And somehow there was a mix-up with the fixture list, and they were forced to play a cup match and a league match. When I say league, it was like a friendly on the same day. They got caught out. Now, a week before this situation, Cross Keys had played at Stratty, and I scored 2 tries against Llanelli. Anyway, following week, Llanelli have to play Ammon United in the cup, and they have to fulfil a fixture against Newport at Rodney Parade. Anyway, as luck would have it, I had a phone call from Llanelli. Cross Keys didn't have a game, and they said, Gareth, we're short of, we've got to field 2 sides. We're short of players. Would you play on permit for us against Newport? And I said, yeah, I got Cross Keys' permission. They said, yes, that's okay. So I played in the centre for Llanelli against Newport, alongside someone else they drafted in was Ian Hurst, the All Black centre. So we both played against Newport, and Newport won. And strange thing happened after that. The following week, I joined Newport. It was a bit weird, really. Well, you can make of that what you will, but that's the way it actually happened. So I had a reasonable game against Newport. They wanted me in, and people said, but Gareth, you're going to Newport. They got David Bircher, they've got Norman Edwards, they've got Jeff Martin, they've got Ken Davis. And I said, yeah, but I really want to play for Newport. So that's how it happened. That's how I joined Newport, having been a supporter from a very, very young age. Dreamed to play for the club. It happened in a funny way, but that led me to Rodney Parade, and that was great.
You must have created quite the impression playing against them. That must have been quite strange for you, thinking, potentially scoring against my favourite team, my boyhood team. But you were very successful at Newport, over 200 appearances, 90 tries. I mean, if someone had that record these days, I mean, that'd be absolutely astronomical. What would you say are your biggest highlights from your time down at Rodney Parade? Because it's a long career down there, but again, as I said, really successful time.
Well, as I say, Rodney Parade to me was like it was magic. The whole ground is Newport Athletic Club. Ben, you'd know that with Cardiff Athletic Club, and there were all sorts of sports there. So you could go to Rodney Parade and watch world class rugby players, world class cricketers, tennis players. It was fantastic. But for the rugby, for me, playing for Newport was a dream, really. And as a result of me playing for Newport, I achieved greater things in my career. So I got a lot to be thankful for Newport with. But just playing with some great players. And I was thinking back earlier today that in those days, the depth of talent in Welsh rugby was absolutely amazing. In my position, whether I played wing or centre, you go to Abervale and you'd be up against Arthur Lewis and Alan Tovey. You go to Cardiff, you'd be up against Gerald Davis, Finlayson, Paul Evans, Mike Murphy, players like this. You go to Aberavon, there'd be Clive Shell, John Bevan, Neil Hutchins. You go to Neath, it'd be Elgin Rees. You go to London Welsh, it'd be Shanklin and Keith Hughes. The depth of talent was absolutely unbelievable in those days. You could virtually name all the sort of the players of all the top clubs in Wales. And it was great to play against those. You go to Bridgend, it'd be Steve Fennick and Lyndon Thomas. You go to Llanelli, it'd be Phil Bennett, Burgess, Ray Gravel. It was never ending. And it was great to play against all these sort of top players in the company of other very good players that play for Newport. But obviously, go back to the 70s where I played, getting to the cup final, and yeah, Ben, you might remember this when Newport beat Cardiff. Yeah. It was actually I didn't play in that. We were very lucky. Newport were very lucky to be in the final, because in that year, Tumble nearly beat us in the cup down in Tumble. It's a very famous, if you ask people from Tumble about the Newport game. And since then, there's been a good relationship between Newport and Tumble. They're a very, very good little club. But I didn't play because David Birch and myself were selected for the Lions tour. And so we had this awkward decision. Do we play in the final against Cardiff, or do we rest in readiness for the Lions tour in New Zealand? I was one of those people. I wanted to play every game. I didn't want to miss any game for whatever reason. Wasn't particularly sensible, I suppose, in that situation. So luckily, the Newport coach, John Ryan, who later coached Cardiff, Buck Ryan, took the decision out of our hands and said, "You're not playing." And so we had Neil Brown and Chris Webber. Chris Webber, played for Cardiff in the end. Very, very fine player, and Neil Brown, and we beat Cardiff. It was a fantastic day. And the following year, we got to the cup final, and we lost to Swansea. Swansea, of course, again, in my position, you had David Richards, you'd have Alan Meredith, Alan Donovan, and Malcolm Dacey, and players like that. It was a real depth of talent in those days, and I certainly remember those two cup finals very, very well. And some of the Easter games, I used to love the Easter games at Newport. Used to play at home on Easter Saturday, Easter Monday, and then the bars on Easter Tuesday. So we had 3 games in 4 days. Now, can you imagine anyone doing that these days?
Yeah.
Yes, it just wouldn't happen, and probably shouldn't have happened then, but it did. And we all wanted to play because you get big crowds at Easter. Bars are always a very big attraction, and yeah, it was hard going. The grounds are always very hard, but Newport was a great place. There's some great players. The committee was legendary at Newport. I was sort of rose with the committee. But it was great. I loved every minute of my time with Newport.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a great time. And I think, you talk about having the depth, and I think that's something we are seeing a little bit more with Wales now. You look at our options at back row, for instance, the depth we have there at 10. We have some brilliant 10s. Obviously, Dan Bigger has the 10-ship. We got people now such as Callum Sheedy, Gareth Evans, Rhys Patchell, Rhys Priestland's coming back to Wales. Who knows if he could get his place back in the Wales squad. But talking about Wales, you make your debut against France. How was that, and how did you find the step up to international rugby? Because players always talk about the difference between the quality at club level and at international level. Did you notice that difference?
Well, because I've been in the squad for a year or so before that actually happened, and I played at what wasn't called Wales B, but it was like a combined Wales clubs against Japan. I scored 3 tries against Japan. I've been in a slightly higher environment than the club rugby, but you're quite right. It is a step up. The intensity is greater. And I always remember, in the squad sessions on the Thursday before we left, for France or played them at home, John Dawes, who was the coach, would actually try and make those first 10 minutes of the training session as intense as he possibly could, because he said, when you play against France, you're not going to be able to breathe for like the first 10 minutes. So we were there on a Thursday, training, and it would be really hard for about 10 minutes, quarter of an hour, to get us attuned to what to expect against France. But big step up in international level. Players are quicker, there's more skillful. But I had a pretty good grounding, up until that point, so didn't find it too bad.
Obviously, you made the step up to international rugby after being involved with the camp for a prolonged period of time. But 1977, was a big year for you, because of course it was the year that the Lions toured in New Zealand. So how did it come about, you finding out that you were going to tour New Zealand with the Lions?
Yeah, well, I think, obviously a lot of players have sounded out about their availability, beforehand. So not that you expect to be picked particularly, but you're there waiting for the announcement. And I think Bobby Windsor found out on my behalf, and I think he found my mother, and my mother got in touch with me somehow, and I found out round the houses, really. And then it was like a few photograph sessions. We were Bobby Windsor at the time worked at Whitehead Steelworks in Newport, and the Argus, South Wales Argus, the Newport paper, got hold of it and said, right, we want some pictures. So Dave Bircher and myself went down to Whitehead Steelworks to photographs with Bobby. And luckily, Charlie didn't get picked originally, Charlie Faulkner, because he was working at Whitehead's as well. But thankfully, Charlie came out later as a replacement. So it was all good, because Bobby was born in Newport, and so there's a lot of Newport connections there, really, because Dave Bircher was born in Newport, I was born in Newport, Bobby was born in Newport. Bobby used to take me training at Cross Keys. We were at that was an interesting experience. Yeah.
Oh, it's crazy times. And you mentioned like all those close connections, and especially on a Lions tour, I think it's important. And you see, like, even though you've got the ability for people from different nations to come together and work together as one squad, it is really important that you've got those foundations to build upon, as you mentioned, with a strong Newport connection when you started on that Lions tour. But it was really, really important when you look back at the 77 tour, because from my understanding, and I'm a massive Lions fan and I've been following them for as long as I can remember, But when I looked and I did some research into the 77 tour, it was probably the longest Lions tour that I can remember. It was 26 games in total. And then when I look back at the squad that was selected originally, there was only 30 men originally named for a 26-game tour of New Zealand. So when you looked at that schedule, you must have been thinking, I'm going to have to take a couple of pairs of boots with me here because we're going to get through some games.
Well, yeah, well, it was interesting, because they took 2 players for every position, basically. That's what happened. And, of course, there were some injuries and you get replacements, but never the massive squads like you had now. And the other thing was there's only one coach, of course. So when you got a minibus full of coaches now, but John Dawes was the only coach. But yeah, what a fantastic experience. But I expected to have my share of games, but what actually happened on the tour was that Elgin Rees, one of the other wingers, had some hamstring problems, as did Peter Squires, who was from England. He was the other winger. So I ended up, if you like, playing more than my fair share of games because the other guys were injured. I didn't mind that, although it got a bit wearing, towards the end.
Oh, absolutely. But yeah, like you said, you ended up having your fair share of games. From my understanding, 19 games that I saw your name on the team sheet. But more importantly, you played in those 3 tests against the All Blacks and across the tour. It must have been an incredible experience for you as a player. And like you said, you build those building blocks where you got to that stage playing for the Lions. But what was your main takeaway from that Lions tour when you look back at those few months that you were out? Because you travelled out, if we're talking about if that was today, you'd be going out there in a matter of 2 weeks' time. Whereas the actual squad, it's a number of weeks yet before they even, well, it's just under a week until they name the squad. But you'd have been almost travelling now. So what was your main takeaway from that tour as a player?
Well, I think if you ask most players, where they think the top tour is for rugby, they'd say they want to go to New Zealand, to face the All Blacks, and it probably was one of the hardest tours. And the reason it was very hard, I think, was because of the weather. I don't know the exact statistics, but I think it was their wettest winter in about 30 years. So virtually every game was, well, pitches then were not like the pitches we have now.
No.
They were nothing like it. Okay. So pitches were wet, they were thick with mud. And don't forget, you'd have this most days when you were training as well. So you can imagine that sort of, effect on you over the course of those 14, 15 weeks that we were away, where every game was virtually not a mud bath, but it destroyed any hope we had of coming up with back play which matched the play of the forwards, because the forwards were exceptional. The conditions were against sort of expansive back play, apart from some flashes. People like JJ had a few flashes, I think. Andy Irving was brilliant on that tour. But generally speaking, I think the weather was against us, which was a shame. But in terms of the test matches, I came in for the second test. Wasn't picked for the first test. I've been playing quite well. He picked Peter Squires. I don't know the reason why they wanted me in the second test, but I was facing Brian Williams, who I rated one of the greatest wingers of his generation. Really fantastic player, and very, very powerful guy. And so the second test was at Christchurch, and we really needed to win that. We lost the first test in Wellington, and we won. JJ scored a remarkable try, and we won that game. I think it was 13-9, but very, very tense, all the way through. They are tough to beat in New Zealand, and there was a bit of sort of intensity about the thing. But bear in mind that we'd lost the first test. We felt we owed it, to ourselves to win that. We were good enough to win it, and we actually won it. So that was probably the highlight for me. The other two tests were disappointing, for all the reasons I just spoke about, really.
Yeah, and obviously in that final test, losing in extra time, that must have been a real kick to what would have been a real massive journey for all of you as a squad. For that lengthy period of time.
I think to be fair, people say you get what you deserve. I felt we deserved to draw that series, and in a way, the forwards were absolutely magnificent and destroyed New Zealand really, but we couldn't quite put it together. I think in backs, and made the odd mistakes, and they capitalised on it late on, which was very frustrating for us really. But there you are. That's rugby. I would have changed it if I could, but it wasn't to be. So, and then we went for 3 days in Fiji after 14 weeks in the rain in New Zealand. We had 3 days in Fiji, and I remember Fran Cotton saying they had this the wrong way around. Really, it should have been 14 weeks in Fiji, 3 days in New Zealand. So that was good. So I played against Fiji as well, and then we came back and we had this Jubilee match at Twickenham against the Barbars. So I played in that one, lucky enough to score a try in that game where the Lions beat the Barbars. And the Barbars had a really strong side. JPR played and Gerald Davis played. So, all in all, it was, fantastic experience.
Yeah, and I think, like, for any fan watching, you always just try to imagine what that experience is like for the players, what it is to be like in that test environment. And I know, like, for as long as I can remember, I think the 2005 series was the one that was the first Lions tour that I was heavily invested in. I would have been around 10 or 11 at the time. And just remembering how magical it was, because obviously it was in New Zealand, so the games were on early in the morning, and wondering why at 8 o'clock in the morning my father was sat in front of the TV screen and thinking, this is absolutely bizarre. But I think if you look at New Zealand and Wales together, they're both very, very similar in terms of their attitude towards rugby. It is like a religion, throughout Wales. We have got other sports as well, but it's rugby is the main passion that drives forward. A little bit of a side note here. I wanted to ask this question simply for my own personal reasoning. Obviously, we received the sad news a few weeks ago that John Dawes had sadly passed away. And for me, coming from Lewis Pengham, which was John's former comprehensive school, it was a really difficult one to take. But I wanted to get your thoughts on what he was just like as a coach, because you mentioned him briefly when you talked about the build-up to those French games. But what was he like on that Lions tour? Because obviously there was a lot of players there, a lot of players to try and get a cap on, but obviously the Welsh boys knew him best.
Yeah, of course, yeah. Well, he was just a great guy. And don't forget that only 6 years before that, he was captain in the Lions.
Yeah.
So I guess you could say he was pretty familiar with, the game as it was then. He wasn't out of touch or anything like that. But of course, it was very difficult for him. Because he was the only coach, he was probably a back specialist rather than forward. So, I think the forwards almost got taken over by Terry Cobner, to be fair. But to me, he was a great rugby brain. And he would have insights into players that he would share with you. But for me, the overriding thing with John Dawes was, well, Sid we used to call him, was his sincerity. He's a very genuine sort of guy. I remember once when one of the functions we went to was in a Maori marae, they call it. And when you went to one of these functions and what have you, someone from the Lions would have to make a speech, and on this occasion the manager wasn't there, George Burrell, so Dawsey had to make a speech. They were absolutely fantastic, where he was paying homage to the the culture, the beliefs of the Maori people. Very, very emotional. Brilliant speaker, John Dawes. As a coach, he was one of these people who understood that feedback to players should be given more in praise than actually development or criticism. And he understood that, because when you are constantly sort of criticized, if you like, by a coach, then you're really not very, receptive to taking that feedback. But he understood that, so he would give you little praises, and he's very, very kind man, So on that tour, it got a little tough. The press in New Zealand were absolutely dreadful to us, and a lot of supporters, and they're very, very hard to go. And he was very, very kind to lots of players, including me. His knowledge of rugby, I think, second to none. I've never known anybody with as much knowledge, and his insight. What he loved was the passing game. John Dawes. He always used to strike me as saying, "Look, Gareth, the pass will always beat the man," and he was actually proved right so many times with that one. He was a wonderful man, very sincere, very genuine man, very kind. I couldn't fault him in any way, really. I really liked John.
Yeah, he really was a superb man, and we're going to miss him greatly. But you mentioned there when he said you say about the passing game, the pass will always beat the man. When you look back through the archives of the best tries ever scored on Lions tours, on in anything really, back in sort of the 70s, 80s, it was always this wide, expansive game where, for players like yourself out on the wing, 99 times out of 100, those passes, like you said, would beat the man, and the winger would be away in the corner. But when you mentioned there, obviously John Dawes captained the Lions in 71, and then obviously went on to coach them in 77. But then from that squad of 77, of course, you had Bill Beaumont, who's now gone on to his role with World Rugby. But also you had Fran Cotton and Sir Ian McGeechan as well, who've now gone on to take up roles with the Lions. Obviously Fran went on the 2001 tour to Australia as part of the management. Sir Ian McGeechan has been probably, I think if you cut him, he bleeds Lions. But was that anything that you ever considered yourself going into a role like that?
I've never been asked. I don't know. I think those roles are taken by real students of the game. McGeechan, a real sort of student of the game, understands that, and Fran as well. No, well, I don't think for 1 minute I'd be asked, but a bit old for that now, I think.
Yeah, it's a strange one, really, because I think sometimes you think players, their natural transition is to go into coaching, and I think sometimes it is very much dependent on yourself as a player, whether you are that sort of person that is happy to explain how you want the game to be played, or whether you are that person that just loves the ball in your hands and loves to play. I've read an interesting article, this was a couple of months back now, somebody saying about obviously there's been so much controversy whether this Lions tour would go ahead or not due to COVID. But in recent years, we've seen Lions tours get shorter and shorter and shorter. This Lions tour is only going to be 8 games long. Obviously, COVID would have impacted on that. But for you, how hard is it to get up to speed and running with like sort of a Lions style of play as opposed to your national teams? And especially with the Lions squad this year, they just got 8 games to get themselves. Well, those 8 games include the test series. So how hard is it? How hard did you find it, sort of transitioning into the Lions style of play from national side?
Yeah, well, obviously, I think there's a lot more preparation now than there would have been in when I toured. When I toured, I mean, I think we had 2 or 3 days in London, at Twickenham, and then it was on the fields in New Zealand straight away. And I think we probably had a couple of weeks before the first game, so we had a bit of a chance to sort of try and create some sort of style. But what I think is going to happen with these short tours and the 8 games is sides are almost going to be selected before they go. This is what I understand is going to happen, so that Gatland will know what his side for the first 2 or 3 games will be, which is a bit weird, because when you go on a Lions tour, what you want to try and do is to get in the test team. And so you want the opportunity to actually show what you can do on, in South Africa or in New Zealand. And that looks as if it could be quite hard to do if he's got some views. So they're not going to have much of a chance to show. So a lot of what I think will happen is that the form from the last 6 nations will count for a lot in what Gatland's going to provide for the first sort of 2 or 3 games. But the preparation is key, and so I'm sure with the coaches they've got, covering every position and every skill. That's a bit different to what we had, of course, in '77 with the one coach. So I think they'll be prepared. I hope so. I think aren't the English clubs going to release their players, and I think there was that sort of situation where they think, well, you've got to pay us an arm and a leg or whatever it is. But I can imagine, getting injured in like the first game on a Lions think, well, I've only got eight games to go. I might get on for 20 minutes. And you think, well, I know once you get on the field, you're a Lion. I mean, I think that's, but you've got to play. I was, in a sense, lucky that I didn't have an injury and I played, 19 games. And but on a long tour, when you're injured, it ain't much fun. I can tell you, it's not much fun. So going back to your questions, I think they'll be prepared. I think that they'll know which style of play that they want to play before they get there, and they'll pick the players then to actually play that style.
Yeah, it'll be interesting later on in our chat to get your starting 15 and see who you would pick. Let's go back to your club career. You finished off with Cardiff. You only managed to play 6 times for them, but what was the reason for the move to Cardiff? Because Newport and Cardiff aren't always the best of friends.
Oh, I don't know. I think it was some sort of internal spat I was having those in Newport, and I went to Cardiff. There've been quite a lot of movement between Cardiff and Newport players over the years, and some have been more successful than others. I happen to think that you're either a Newport player or you're a Cardiff player. And I know that sounds quite strange, but I think it's true. I played in Newport with several players from Cardiff, Dave Barry, Pablo Rees, and people like that. But I think they were really Cardiff players. They played well, don't get me wrong, but I think they were really Cardiff players. So I don't know what it was, a minor spat, but I was then at the end of my career, and I had so many injuries that, I probably shouldn't have gone to Cardiff if the truth were known. But I played against the Maoris. But I couldn't really, as a result of my injuries, reproduce the form that I wanted to show. So I gave it up in the end. Gave it up.
Yeah, you obviously retired due to injury, and we've spoken to a few of the players, and they've spoken about the challenges they've faced while having injuries. How did you find having to retire through injury? Was it a very difficult time for you, or were you ready to retire at that point?
Yeah, no, I wasn't really ready to retire. What actually happened was, when I went to Australia with Wales in '78, I probably played my best rugby. And up until then, I was in the squad, but really a reserve to Gerald Davis and JJ Williams. And then I had a phone call when we came back from Australia from the Newport coach, who said, "I've got some good news for you." And I said, "Oh, what's that?" He said, "Gerald's retired." So I felt that I was the replacement for Gerald and JJ when they were injured before. So I thought, this is my chance to gain some more caps. Then in the January, Newport played Llanelli in the Schweppes Cup, and I had a very nasty injury. I had a double fracture of the jaw, which was wired up for 8 weeks, and they sent me to a place in London who ran the British Boxing Board of Control, and they examined me, and they said, if you were a boxer, we would be saying you need to be out for 3 years for that to heal. We wouldn't let you box for 3 years. I came back too early. Typically, it's what players used to do in the days. Used to play injured, and I cracked it again. So I had sort of 3 broken jaws. In Australia, I suffered a depressed fracture of the cheekbone. It's a very nasty injury. I came on as sub in the second test in Sydney for Alan Donovan, who was played fullback. In the first few minutes, I caught an elbow, and my cheek just went in, a big hole in my cheek. And at the time, we'd used all our subs. So JPR Williams says, "Oh, look, you can't do any more damage to that, and you can't go off because we haven't got any more subs. You've got to stay on." which was, which wasn't the opinion of my consultant surgeon when I came back in St. Lawrence, Chepstow. So I stayed on against Australia. I didn't know where I was. I was sort of wandering around the field like a lost soul, trying to avoid people, but I couldn't go off. So anyway, I mean, that injury, I had a lot of facial injuries.
You want to have the game be physical. That's why we love the game. We love seeing the big hits, but again, there needs to be that responsibility on players to be able to say, right, I'm not okay. We've obviously seen the very unfortunate injury to George North over the past week or so, and he's going to be out of the Lions tour and potentially could have been looking to start for the Lions. And, we want to hopefully see players able to go on tours to continue playing and these injuries. And as the game gets more physical, players get bigger, get stronger, we are going to see more injuries. Just need to be regulated a little bit better, I feel. I'm interested in your life post-rugby because you did get into coaching, and Ben mentioned that you worked with the great in John Dawes. Was that something you always wanted to do, was to get into coaching? Because obviously you coached your beloved club, Newport. Was that another dream came true?
I had a call one day from a guy by the name of Byron Faulkner, who is Charlie Faulkner's cousin. And Byron I played with Byron for Crosskeys, and he played a bit for Newport, good back row forward. And he was coaching a junior club in Newport called Newport Saracens, very sort of famous club in Newport. And he said, "Will you come down and coach the Saracens?" So I thought, oh yes, okay, I will. So I went down, coached the Saracens, and I got a friend of mine, Nigel Webb, who played for Newport, to come and help me as well. So we went down to the Saracens, and we were very successful. I think we lost only one game, built a good discipline, built a good team, and effective winning rugby, attractive to watch, etc., etc. And then Newport were going through a rough time, and I got called to coach at Newport. With Stuart Watkins as team manager. Stuart was a famous Welsh wing, one of my sort of early heroes, and Nev Johnson was the forwards coach. Nev played against the All Blacks in '63. So we took over Newport, and at the time, because of what had gone on before, leagues were just coming in. National leagues were just coming in, and Newport were going to be relegated to like it wasn't called the second division. I think it was called the first division, but we're the top division with the championship, something like that. So we were in the sort of second level, if you like. And we sat down. We said, well, the players we got are okay, but do we need to recruit? So we set about a recruitment process, and we got some great players. Paul Turner was one of the first players I managed to get to Newport. And I wanted Paul because he's just a winner. Paul, wherever Paul Turner goes, he succeeds. And then through Paul's sort of influence, and he knew a lot of players, we started looking at some of the Pontypool players. Roger Bidgood came down, Keith Orrell, then Kevin Mosley, Alan Carter. And then we also looked in Bath. We got some Bath players, including Kevin Withy. David Llewellyn came down. He had been in New Zealand and played a bit for Ebervale. We had a very, very good side, coupled with the players that were already there. So we managed to mould that, and I think we lost one game in that league. We won the league and got promoted. I think we had a record win against the Barbars. So we weren't only playing these sides like in the league, we also had other fixtures. And Cardiff, I think we comfortably beat Cardiff, Ben. Sorry to about that. And Barbars, I think we put a record score on the Barbars. But the biggest game, and it's one of the biggest games I've seen at Newport, was it was the time when Neath were ruling the roost in Welsh rugby. They had a fantastic side, and they'd gone, I think it was 51 or 52 unbeaten games against Welsh opposition. We took that record, so we were way above the league that we were in terms of ability. So yeah, we got promoted, but also had some fantastic wins there. So yeah, I enjoyed coaching. I then started a new job though, which meant that my time was limited. So I had to pass on then to Roger Powell and Paul Turner, and and they went from strength to strength.
Yeah, and I think that's it's interesting now. You've obviously played for clubs, and now we have the whole region system. I know it's a very hot topic here in Wales. I'm of the age where I don't really remember the formation of the regions, just a little bit too young. But what was your response at the time? Do you remember the response and the reaction at the time about going from clubs where they were really representing the towns or the villages to all of a sudden we're saying 5 original regions? Obviously now we're down to 4. What was your response to it, and how do you see it today? Because we'll be honest, the Welsh regions are struggling in comparison to the national side. So how do you see it?
I see it in the context of very poor communication from the Welsh Rugby Union about this word region. I think because they failed to explain it properly, I think people took it to they believed that it was like a representative side of that region, where it's not representative at all. The only regional responsibility is to develop the pathway. Okay, so it's not, we are representing, Glamorgan, Gwent, or anything like that, even though, that's what a lot of people thought it was, because it was very badly communicated. To my mind, it should have been clubs. I'm glad Cardiff are going back to Cardiff Rugby. The Blues is a ridiculous, superfluous addition to that. Everyone knows it's Cardiff. Now, what's happened at Newport? Newport Rugby Club got stuffed, by terrible decisions at board level on the Dragons and Newport, where they mortgaged Rodney Parade, which was owned by Newport, to pay for the Dragons, and Newport are now left without a ground. To my way of thinking, this is clubs. These are pro clubs. They're not, the only way they're regions is in this geographical development pathway that they have. And I think each of the clubs actually does a good job in that, producing players in that pathway. But I sense there's trouble ahead. I really do. I think with the Welsh Rugby Union, the way they are making some decisions, I think this is heading for some intense discussions. Let's put it that way. I mean, the Welsh Rugby Union took out this loan because they were unable to pay the regions, or the pro clubs, what they should be paid for the services of the international players. They are making the regions pay that back, which is ridiculous, because it's the Welsh Rugby Union's debt. It's not the pro clubs. And now they're investing in hotels, whereas the 4 pro clubs seem to be struggling like hell financially, like all rugby clubs are in this pandemic. And yet, the Welsh Rugby Union seem to be happy. Now, the Welsh Rugby Union are happy because Wales have done well. Yeah. And they are ignoring, not ignoring, I'm probably putting it a bit strongly, they are not taking due account of the fallibility or potential fallibility of the pro clubs, which is the supply chain. So the reason Wales are successful is because they're being developed at the pro clubs, as part of the reason, and they're employed by the pro clubs. So pay the people properly. The budgets that they got are meaningless. This is why, the pro clubs in Wales can't seem to make any headway in Europe, because they're competing against the Irish sides, and they got massively bigger budgets. So I think rather than investing in hotels and beer and zip wires and all that sort of stuff, invest in your supply chain, because that if you don't, and you're looking at I've got no objection in looking at long-term investment, but don't let your supply chain fail in the meantime. And I think there's going to be some awkward times ahead for the Welsh Rugby Union unless they change that opinion, because I think the Welsh Rugby Union's view is the Welsh Rugby Union create all this income, but it's the pro players, it's the pro clubs that produce the players to give the Welsh Rugby Union the chance to produce that income. So get together, try and fund them properly, and then I think everyone will be a bit happier. But at the moment, I don't like the way it's going at all.
No, I agree with you. And I think what we're seeing with the Rainbow Cup, for instance, is a load of rubbish. I think it's an absolute shambles, in fact. And I heard reports that each club would receive, I think, £500,000 for agreeing to join from South Africa Rugby. And if the Welsh Rugby Union aren't showing that support to the regions, well, obviously they're going to bite your hand off for that and take it straight away. And we've seen recently, I think, during the 2019 Rugby World Cup, where they're talking about the Ospreys and the Scarlets merging. And as an Ospreys fan, let me tell you, that was not fun at all.
I'd have had more respect for the Welsh Rugby Union if they'd have said, right, we're taking over and it's going to be Gwent Dragons. That's our name, is Gwent Dragons. They didn't even do that. They tried to satisfy both, the Newport people who form their biggest fan base and people, in the outlying districts. It hasn't worked very well, but I agree with you that the latest results of the Dragons look more promising than they have done a while. But if you look at the season, I don't think it's been that successful. Yeah. Other than people think there's a bit more potential here now because of the players. He's brought some new players, like Jamie Roberts has, come in. And so as a coach, you've got to have the players, really. And I think that's part of the argument about the funding, is that squads need to be stronger, and they can do that if you are funded like Leinster are funded.
Yeah, it's a really frustrating one with regional rugby. And like you mentioned all these local clubs, Cross Keys, you mentioned all of that. I think I'm a Bargoed boy, so I would naturally fall within the Dragons region. Yeah. However, from a very, very young age, I was far more attracted to go and watch Cardiff Blues because, like you say there, Newport and Gwent, to me, mean nothing because technically I fall in the Caerphilly borough. Yes, I would be considered a Dragons supporter because that is my region. However, like you said, I don't think it's a true representation of the people because, as you mentioned, Newport is their biggest fan base. The stadium is within Newport. But then, like, you've got massive feeders, like Elliot D, one of the best talents coming out the Dragons at the minute. He's a Newbridge boy, which again is under Caerphilly umbrella. So I think the way in which they've organised it at the moment, and as in recent times, as you mentioned, they've pulled things away. Originally it was the Neath Swansea Ospreys. It was the Llanelli Scarlets. It was the Newport Gwent Dragons. But now all of a sudden we seem to have moved away from proper teams which were made up and, as you said, representing the areas that they come from. Brandon, you're talking about having that sort of identity, but now you're saying I play for the Dragons. Well, as you mentioned, Gareth, it could be what is that, the netball team, the rugby league team. It just doesn't seem to make sense at the moment. So
well, it's interesting when on occasions where you see the Dragons playing in England or in France, very often the side that they're playing will put Newport in front of them because they associate, they think it's Newport. And so, I've spoken to a lot of the fans of the Dragons who are in Newport. They actually think it's Newport. It's not Newport, but they think it is, or they want to believe it. So you can't have this by a postcode situation. You can't say you live in this postcode area, so therefore you have to support the Ospreys or whatever it is. You can support whoever you want to. Yeah. So this regional thing is pie in the sky. It ought to be clubs, in my view, just for clubs. But I mean, I don't know, other people will make decisions on that. But I think, David Buttress is thinking about the branding of the Dragons. I mean, I think he is carefully thinking, should this be, Dragon? Should it be Newport from a branding? Because people associate with the name, don't they? I mean, the Ospreys have done okay with it in that way, but I think people still regard that as Swansea, don't they, Brandon?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the thing for me, I actually live in North Wales, in Rhyl, right at the top of North Wales. Okay. So the only reason I support the Ospreys is because my grandfather and my family on my mum's side lived in Swansea for quite a few years, and so my grandfather supported Swansea, and so for me that was the natural decision. Obviously I was a little bit too young to remember the Celtic Warriors, but they would have been the region for me in a sense. And the closest professional club to me right now is Sale Sharks. Right. So for myself, it's quite a bit of a dilemma really to know who to support, but I think the regions don't truly represent the areas that they're talking about, and people need to feel a connection. And I think, having spoken to Irish fans, having spoken to fans who support a team in the Premiership, in the Gallagher Premiership, they are traditional areas, so you naturally support them from where you are. And the whole idea of saying this system has worked with clubs for years and years and years, and yet we're just going to say, do you know what, let's just put 5 regions in, one fails after a season, a few years later down the line we'll try and merge 2 huge rivals with each other and see what happens. So I think it's a big problem, but you have to say that the regions are now beginning to produce really good talents. I think there's a lot of good young talents coming through. I think at the Ospreys, Kieran Williams looks fantastic. I think at the Blues, Gareth Evans is a really exciting prospect. And Ben seems to think he's the best 10 in the world. But you look at the Dragons, you look at some of their players as well. And, you know, Aaron Wainwright's absolutely brilliant. Don't know what he's done wrong not to get into the Wales squad. And I think Sam Davis has really stepped up to the mark for them. But if we look at the Wales squad now in general, what are Six Nations, first of all? Very, very unexpected. What's your assessment of the Wales squad and of Pivac? Because I'll be honest, I was thinking if we had another poor Six Nations under Pivac, then some serious questions would have to have been asked. What did you make of the Six Nations? How impressed were you with us, or were we just a little bit lucky? Or a bit of both, maybe?
Well, first of all, I'm pleased for Pivac, because I think, you know, I agree with you, Brandon. Lots of serious questions would have been asked if we'd have had a very poor Six Nations, but we didn't. You know, he's judged on results, and he's got results. And I'd probably say, you know, use the word pragmatic. We played in a pragmatic way, Wales, rather than sort of, you know, exuberance and flair. You know, save for Rhys Samet. I mean, I think he was a different level. But I thought we did well. When you say we were lucky, okay, we took advantage of people leaving the field. You know, whatever word you want to use to describe that. On another day, it might not have happened, and would the results have been different? I don't know, but it's in the record book, it's in the newspapers. You know, we won the championship, so well done, Pivac. And as you say, and I think we have some good talent coming through. The problem is, you know, that the pro clubs are underfunded, so they're always going to be sort of struggling against the big spenders in Ireland and what have you. And you know, people mustn't ask those questions, I don't think. You know, why aren't we winning European Cups? Well, fund the pro clubs properly. Don't invest in hotels. Make sure that you're invested in your supply chain, and that, you know, you might see a difference, because the squads are just not strong enough. Because you know, Leinster can field virtually 13, 14 internationals in their second team. And so they're going to be winning these games that, you know, that our pro clubs are struggling with. But as I say, I follow the what some people call the community game. I follow the semi-pro level, which in an ideal world would have been the step up, if you like, to, you know, to the pro level. It hasn't worked out, because there is quite a wide gap in standards between that semi-pro level and the pro level. So I suspect what they're trying to do is to get an A team or an under-23 league going, because you get people who are in the sort of pro squads not playing. Hardly playing a game, you know.
And with COVID as well, you know, that's been the other big thing with COVID. Some players won't have played for a year, a game of rugby. That's why the Rainbow Cup maybe has some benefits, that these youngsters do get to play rugby. But as you said, the system is a little bit all messed up, isn't it?
Yeah, I would have liked to seen somehow that the Premiership be a stepping stone, but I can't see it. It's too far. But I'd still like to see the situation where players who are 24, 25, who haven't been taken on by pro level, somehow, you know, have a chance. But it seems to me that, you know, if you haven't made it by 19, 20, then you know, you've had it, you know. And I don't like that. I think, you know, there are some players in that Premiership with the right, you know, with the right guidance and training could actually come through. Not that many, but you know, there's some. So perhaps that could be the third level. The A or under 23 could be the second, as long as they got enough games. I still think that, you know, if they're not playing, play them in the Welsh Premiership. because that game time is not completely useless. It'll be good for them. But I think that under-23 and A side will probably be the next step, really, if we can.
Yeah, and I think it's the perfect opportunity, like you said, then to produce the likes of Louis Rees-Zammit, these sort of players that you get almost like once every few years they come onto the scene, they make one hell of a name for themselves, and before you know it, they're being moved here, there, and everywhere, and they become the hot property of different people. But we're going to finish now. We've got a couple of questions each for you now. We're gonna go for the big questions that are within the rugby community at the moment. So I'm going to start with the first one being, you're Warren Gatland. You're naming your squad on the 8th of May. I think it's the 8th of May. Mm-hmm. Who is your Lions captain going to be for this tour to South Africa?
It is a difficult one for any sort of selection committee, because you would think that a Lions captain should be an automatic choice in the test team. Over the years, I can tell you that that hasn't worked all the time. There have been several occasions where people have been made captain and have been struggling to make the test side. And I don't know whether there's any sort of candidates that you could say they are certainties for the test team. The one I'm going to go for, though, is Alan Wynne-Jones. I think he is the nearest thing to a certainty for the test team that you can get amongst those captaincy candidates. You might say, well, is it Hogg? Itoje's like a red card waiting to happen, I think. You have to be very careful with him. Hogg, no, I'm going for Alan Wynne-Jones as captain.
And you both,
I like that a lot.
Yeah, my Brandon and I have discussed this in depth, and very similarly to yourself, we said that if you look at all the candidates, and what myself and Brandon did, we looked at it from terms of, we took the four captains of the national sides, and then we also picked two bolters that we thought could potentially reach in there. And Brandon discussed Maro Itoje's standpoint, and I'm very much with you, Gareth, that although you cannot underestimate the young man's talents, he really, really is. If he can tailor certain parts of his game to make sure that he fits the mold that modern rugby is going now in terms of the discipline and the way that the game is played, he is going to be one of the greats. But I think you can't avoid the leadership abilities of Alan Wynne-Jones. I think he is the perfect man for the job, even though he's an Osprey. But we won't gripe over that. But you mentioned there, you're saying the likes of Louis Rees-Zammit, and we just said now about players that sort of have come from nowhere almost, and now almost in contention for this Lions selection. If we look across the border, you've got the names of the likes of Joe and Sam Simmons, who are almost called these bolters. We look back to the 2009 tour when Keith Earls was named in the Lions squad before he'd ever played a game for Ireland. So from your assessment of rugby at the moment, we've looked at European games over recent times. I know you're a big fan of the club game, but who would you think would make a good wild card potential option for Warren Gatland on this Lions tour?
From what I've seen recently, I think Simmons has got a chance, number 8. But as a name that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think by anybody, and I think he's got a chance, a slim chance, but with Townsend there, I think he's got a reasonable chance, and that's Ali Price.
Okay.
I thought he had a really good game against France. That was his best game of the championship. It wouldn't surprise me totally if that guy went. Wouldn't surprise me.
I think from myself and Brandon, again, we've talked about this on various videos, but I think Price looks very good when he's got Russell outside him. And I know, obviously, that's only come back as of recent times when Finn Russell came back into Scotland contention. I do like the look of Ali Price, and I think 9 is probably the one position you've got to say at the moment that Gatland will be looking and going, there's not a definite 9 from within the national teams.
Yeah, my next question is a little bit fun, a little bit different. We want you to pick your starting 15 for the Lions. So if we go through each position, we'll go from fullback and we'll see who you pick. So who would you like to see start at fullback for the Lions in the first test against?
I'm going Hogg, fullback.
Good answer. Good answer. I think Hogg has been the outstanding fullback, and it's sad to see the likes of Lee Halfpenny, the way his career has gone over the last few years. For me, Liam Williams is a little bit too much of a hothead. I'd be a little bit worried about that. Who do you have in the 14 jersey, the first of two wingers?
I'm going Anthony Watson on that.
Ooh, okay. Reason for Anthony Watson's?
Pardon?
What's your reason for putting Watson in there?
Oh, I think he's in form. I think he's dangerous. I think he's done everything asked of him. Yeah, I go him. But it's not that clear cut. I mean, if he has a couple of bad games, then someone else might fit in. But I think I would start with him if everything else being equal, and I would have Liam Williams on the other wing.
Ooh, no Louis B. Summit.
Well, I think he could. I think he'll probably go. Reece Summit. I think there'll be a lot of kicking. I think Liam Williams, fullback wing, is very adept at handling that. So I'd go for there. Okay,
so for the centres, obviously we've spoke about George North, the injury to him. Jonathan Davis probably not playing at the peak of his powers, but we know he's a class act. Henshaw, probably one of the best centres in the world at the minute. Who would be your centre partnership?
I'm going Henshaw and Slade.
Ooh, okay. Henry Slade. Ben mentioned Henry Slade as well. Why would you be looking to put Slade in there? I completely agree with Henshaw, but Slade I'm a bit 50-50 on.
Slade, class player, got everything going for him. Great footballer. I think you've got to look at him. Again, not that clear cut. I think if Jonathan Davis had been in form, I think he'd probably be in that position. I don't think he's in form.
No.
But I think Gatlin probably likes him, so he could well go. But every time I see Slade, I think he offers something a little bit different, to the others. We shall see.
Yeah, indeed. And let's move to the halfbacks. Who are you going to have at 10?
I'm going bigger at 10.
Yep. That's great. I think he's been brilliant recently. I think he's been absolutely fantastic. What about Finn Russell? Is he too much of a risk, Russell?
Yeah, he might be. I like him. Don't get me wrong. I like it. I like watching him as a player, but yeah, you as a coach, you have your heart in your mouth sometimes. Yeah, he's a great player. But I'd have Conor Murray at 9.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, as Ben said, I think that 9 jersey is very much up for grabs. Obviously, we had Thomas Williams down at the Blues, had an injury, but has been playing really well when he's had chances this season for Wales. For England, Ben Young's very experienced. Conor Murray at 9 for Ireland, and then you got someone like Ali Price in Scotland. And let's move to your front row. Who do you have in your front row?
This is really my area of expertise. I think Ken Owens will hook, and I think Furlong will be the tight head.
Okay.
I think Wyn Jones got a good chance making loose head.
Yeah, well, I think that's a brilliant front row. I think you've got Ken Owens, absolute warrior. He'll carry the ball hard. The line out improved a lot for Wales. Wyn Jones had a fantastic Six Nations. Then Furlong, I mean, if you can sidestep a couple of Scottish backs, then you deserve to be in the team.
Furlong's a shoe-in, I think. I think he's outstanding. The second row, Alan Wyn Jones and Itoje.
Oh, okay. You were talking about.
I am going to pick him with a caveat that you got to be an even properly, because I think Ben, as you say, he's a hell of a player, Itoje, but he can be a bit of a liability sometimes. So as long as he can curb himself, he's in. Ryan's got to be in with a chance. Byrne, I think that Byrne they're probably looking at as a back row, a 6, I think.
Yeah,
I think he'd be a good 6. He's not going to be in my test team, but I think he's got a chance of being in that side.
Yeah, I think Byrne over the ball was incredible throughout the tournament, wasn't he? And Absolutely fantastic. Let's get to the back row then. Loads of great players.
I got a shoe in there with Faletau.
At 8? Faletau at 8, yes.
Faletau at 8. I got Tipperick at 7.
Ooh, okay.
And I've got Curry.
Curry at 6. No place for Hamish Watson in the team?
Well, he's got to be a hell of a player to be above those two and me, and he's a good player, Watson, don't get me wrong. I like him. I like Byrne at 6 as well. And I think that's possibly could happen somewhere. But I think Curry will take a bit of leaving out.
Yeah.
I think
this form.
Yeah, I think that the 6 jersey is probably the one where you think there's going to have to be a player in there that's adaptable, because if you look across the Six Nations, if you look at the options through the Six Nations, obviously Underhill would have, if you'd have gone back a few years ago, for me, Underhill was my 6 for the Lions. Because I just think that he's an absolute freak on the field. He's so talented. But obviously he's injured, so he didn't play anything during the Six Nations. So I think 6 is one of those things that it is going to have to be these players with adaptability. So you could see Byrne, you could see the likes, our players going to have to be asked to switch across, at the end of the day. And I know that this was mentioned on other Lions stores, it's just a number on your back. If they go out with a certain game plan and a certain mindset, I don't think it matters whether you've got 6, 7 or 8 on your back, which I think that's where Simmons could come into the equation. I think that's where Byrne could come into the equation. And I think it is that one position, and I would never, even if I was the best coach in the world, I would not want to pick this Lions back row, because no matter who you pick, you're going to upset people and you're going to upset players. But it leaves us with one heck of a bench, and especially against these big South Africans, especially if they do what they did in the World Cup, where they split their bench with 6 forwards and only 2 back replacements.
Yeah,
we could be really up against it.
Yeah, no, and there's one bloke who never gets mentioned, and I don't think he'll go, but he's not far away. He's Richie.
Yeah,
yeah.
I think he's been tremendous, Richie. But there's so much competition, as you guys say, in the back row, that he probably ain't going to go, But he's an outstanding player. So it depends where the Stander goes. I'm not sure about Stander, whether he's going to get on the plane. But I mean, if you got a back row of any 3 from 5 of the 3 I named plus Watson and Byrne, it's going to be a good back row, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And the battle of the breakdown is going to be key. So if we quickly go through your team, so you got Hogg at 15, Anthony Watson and Liam Williams on the wing, Henry Slade and Henshaw in the centres, Bigger and Conor Murray at 10 and 9. In the front row, you've got Wyn Jones, Ken Owens and Furlong, Itoje and Alan Wyn-Jones in the locks. I assume Alan Wyn-Jones is your captain, as you said before. Alan Wyn-Jones is captain. And then Curry, Tipperick and Faletau in the back row. That's a heck of a team. Sorry, go on, Gareth.
Yeah, not bad. I don't know whether many people would pick that side. I don't know. I mean, it's just the way I view things. But they'd probably, pick about 7 or 8, 10 of them. I don't know. Most people wouldn't know.
No, I think there's a few shoe-ins in there. I think there's a lot of positions that are up for debate. And it'll be interesting. One final question I've just thought about now is, from your experience going on tours, how much of the team does the coach know before going out there? How much do you think Gatland will know now? Will he know 10 of his positions? Will he know 5 of them? How many will he already have in his mind, do you think?
I think on short tours, where people haven't got the chance to prove themselves over a number of games before the test is played, he'll have a hell of a good idea what his test team is, I reckon. Hell of a good idea. I reckon he'll have 10 in.